Welcome, everyone. My name is LeAnn Chuboff, and I'm the Vice President of Technical Affairs here at SQF. I am very excited to have you join us for today's webinar, What Good Looks Like, Approved Supplier Programs and FSVP, featuring Jennifer Lott. She's a dynamic and results-oriented leader in the field of quality assurance. So I'm really excited to have us have a conversation with her today. So Jennifer currently serves as the Technical Director at SGS North America, bringing over 25 years of expertise in food safety, quality management systems, and sustainability. Her career goes over 15 plus years in manufacturing, quality assurance, corporate quality assurance, and has a really strong background in auditing, consulting, and regulatory compliance. So she's an excellent resource for us today and today's subjects. At SGS, she has a pivotal role in developing and implementing robust food safety management systems and helping organizations align with industry standards and regulatory expectations. So we welcome Jennifer and are looking forward to your presentation today.
Thank you, LeAnn. First, a few words about SGS. SGS was founded in 1878 as a grain inspection house in Rouen, France. By the mid-20th century, the company had expanded into inspection, testing, and verification services across various sectors. In 1981, SGS was listed on the Swiss Stock Exchange, marking a new phase of global growth. Today, with over 140 years of experience, SGS is recognized as the world's leading testing, inspection, and certification company. SGS employs nearly 100,000 employees globally, operates over 2,500 offices and laboratories worldwide, and serves clients in more than 10 industries globally. The SGS difference is our ability to connect a truly global network with deep industry expertise and consistent service quality. SGS blends innovative digital solutions with our strong background in assessment, auditing, and certification to give businesses confidence throughout their entire supply chain. Beyond compliance, SGS offers consulting, training, and sustainability assurance, helping organizations not only meet current challenges, but also build a responsible and resilient future. In this digital webinar, LeAnn and I will examine the regulatory framework that influences supplier programs with a focus on both SQF and FSVP requirements. From there, we will review the key elements of an effective approval supplier program and discuss how monitoring and metrics can serve as tools for ongoing verification and performance assessment. Finally, we'll bring everything together with best practices and real-world examples to demonstrate how these strategies are successfully put into practice. When we examine a supplier approval requirements, SQF and FSVP adopt slightly different but complementary methods. LeAnn, please lead off our discussion on the SQF supplier program and any changes we may see in Edition 10 coming soon.
Thanks, Jennifer. So SQF supplier requirements, they're actually, if you're following along with your code, we have approved supplier programs in section 2.3.4, and that's where we go over that risk-based approach to supplier approval and what needs to be included in that supplier approval program. Specifications, that second bullet, is referred back to in 2.3.2, and that's where we have specific requirements for all of our specifications spelled out. So it's not just having those specifications, but the type of specifications for raw materials, for packaging, for finished product, etc. So it is developing, managing, and approving those raw materials and finished product and packaging specifications. That process needs to be developed and documented. So I want to focus on those specifications because I feel that that's the start to your approved supplier program. And sometimes where the failure points are in your approved supplier program. And I know Jennifer is going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later on, but that is a very important part to developing that supplier approval program. Because if you don't have a good metric to start off with, then your supplier approval program could fail. And that's within the SQF requirements. One thing I want to mention that oftentimes we kind of forget about is that any change in those specifications need to be notified from the supplier into site management so that the respective change can be reflected on those specifications. Oftentimes we see that suppliers aren't notified and the specifications aren't updated. So I wanted to mention that as well. But we need to, in your overall supplier approval program, the type and frequency of verification is determined by the site. So it is a very risk-based program because it really depends on the type of supplier, the ingredient coming in, whether it's a minor ingredient, a processing aid, or one of those key ingredients into your process. So all of that is risk-based, based off of the product or the process or the risk to that product. And then that same goes with the supplier performance and the evaluation of how that is going to be conducted by the supplier or by that site. So determining the how is really based off risk, but everything needs to be risk-based and include the methods and the frequency. So it could be an annual on-site audit. It could be recognition of another GFSI program. It could be an SQF specific audit. It all really depends on the type and product. And there are emergency protocols for non-approved suppliers. So those suppliers that aren't in the system. So I know we use the word unapproved here, but it doesn't mean that they weren't approved and now we're going to use them. It just is an emergency situation. You may need to source from a different supplier. So they weren't previously approved, but there needs to be methods associated with approving that supplier. So in addition 10, there really aren't many changes to approved supplier programs. It's the way that we are proposing it is going to be consolidated, so it's more streamlined, more specific. So it's right now, I think we have 6 different requirements under approved supplier, and with addition 10, there's 3 different requirements. But that doesn't mean 3 went away. It just means that the 3 kind of went into the other 3 requirements and are very consolidated and streamlined. So that's really the biggest difference in approved supplier programs. And within Edition 10, there isn't anything new or different. It's just streamlined and I'd say maybe a little bit more easier to comprehend.
Thanks, LeAnn. I want to reiterate what LeAnn just said. SQF emphasizes a risk-based approach. Sites determine how often and by what methods they verify suppliers, and sites must document specifications, review performance, and have emergency protocols for unapproved suppliers. FSVP, on the other hand, primarily targets imports. It requires a hazard analysis for each imported food, a formal evaluation of supplier performance, verification activities customized for foreign suppliers, corrective actions when issues are identified, and periodic reassessment at least every 3 years. In short, SQF offers a flexible, site-led framework for managing supplier risk, while FSVP requires structured oversight for imported foods, ensuring hazards are identified and controlled through ongoing verification and reassessment. SQF and FSVP share the goal of supplier assurance, but they differ in certain aspects. Scope, for example, SQF broadly applies to all suppliers, whether domestic or international, while FSVP specifically targets foreign suppliers of FDA-regulated foods imported into the US. Assessment frequency. SQF offers flexibility. Sites decide how and how often to conduct supplier assessments. Conversely, FSVP mandates a structured review at least every 3 years or sooner if new hazards are found. Responsibility. SQF certification is voluntary and driven by market demand, often used to show commitment to food safety. FSVP, on the other hand, is a legal requirement under the Food Safety Modernization Act for US importers. And lastly, documentation. SQF requires records, but allows flexibility again for the site, while FSVP has more specific record-keeping rules, including detailed documentation for each foreign supplier. In short, SQF offers a flexible, globally recognized framework, while FSVP establishes mandatory compliance requirements specific to the US for importers. Building an audit-ready, risk-based program begins with establishing a structured and consistent approach. First, as an organization, you must categorize your suppliers based on their potential risk to food safety, regulatory compliance, and business impact. Then you set clear specifications, documenting detailed requirements for ingredients, packaging, processing aids, and services. After that, you carry out verification activities such as audits, testing, or performance reviews, scaled appropriately to each supplier's risk level. And lastly, you keep thorough records for both that meet both SQF and FSVP requirements, ensuring specifications are not only clear, but are also practical, achievable, and in the case with Foreign Supplier Verification Program, in English, so that they can be read. This approach builds a solid foundation for compliance while fostering confidence and efficiency through the supply chain. LeAnn, do you have any thoughts on specifications that you want to add here?
I know that's my trigger point, but like I mentioned, and I'm sure you agree, is that really is the start to a good approved supplier program, which is why we want to ensure that those specifications are clear, they're attainable. So many times we have specifications that you can tell that they're not going to be met, that it's not going to be met, whether it's a micro limit, whether it's any of that, pH or whatever it might be. It's just not specific to the ingredient or just not attainable. But I do want to say we just had a question in about specifications. And so I don't know, Jennifer, if you want to hop in on this one question. The question is from Justine. It says, so in our SAP, we had a supplier not inform us of their supplier change. And so the product we received looked different. Would we update our approval program for the supplier and put it at a medium risk? Like, would you look at that and say, now, are they a medium risk because they didn't inform, or how would you handle that?
I think from an auditing perspective, I would go back and I would look at what are the requirements you set in your supplier approval program. So did you say to your suppliers, you must notify us when you make changes, and then understand whether or not they met that requirement you set? And whether it's a medium risk, it depends on what the change is with the material. Was it now, did it introduce a new food safety hazard that you need to be looking at? So it's kind of hard to say whether or not I would make it a medium risk or not. There's a lot more to look at. Thoughts, LeAnn?
Yeah. Well, it is a requirement in SQF. So there has to be that notification up in the supply chain. So specifically, why we added that one is for allergens. So if there was a different ingredient or an added ingredient, we actually experienced a recall a few years ago about they changed and added soy into their product, and nobody was informed, and labels weren't reflected, et cetera, et cetera. So that's primarily why that change went into place. But or if there's anything else, if there's a change in how the product is produced or processed, because it all goes back to your HACCP plan, and you're going to evaluate that ingredient based off those specifications, determine what needs to be processed and how that ingredient is being used in your process. So I could see that being an indicator of a potential elevated status and risk, simply because if there is a lack of communication. But I would agree with you, it really would really depend on the type of risk and how it impacted your product and all of that. So, but yeah, it's something to consider maybe as you're doing your supplier matrix and determining risk levels for suppliers.
And one more thought about specifications. We think about specifications and we're talking about raw materials, but we also need to keep in mind that we have to have specification for ingredients, for packaging, for work in progress, and for finished products. And anything else that might fit within your structure of what you have a spec for before it goes out, so that as you're measuring, you have a consistent benchmark that you're measuring against. So I just want to make sure that you understand that specification isn't just the raw material or the finished product.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And then, as you mentioned, don't forget about those smaller ingredients or the processing aids or anything like that that could, while small, maybe you don't use a lot of this particular spice, or it's a small amount that you use, it could greatly impact if there was a recall or if specifications weren't met. And then one other thing too, and I know in supplier approval programs, I'm just basing it off of all the experience. I've been with SQF for 16 years, so I feel like I've been through a lot and I have a lot to share. But one of the things that you might want to consider even as you're developing risk levels for suppliers is the location and where you're receiving that product from. There, a long time ago, we had a recall, and it was a product that contained pomegranate seeds. And those pomegranates were sourced from a country that was experiencing a huge hepatitis A outbreak. And so then those pomegranate seeds got they were contaminated with Hep A, and then there was that recall. So it's understanding all of that to better determine what that risk level of the supplier is. So putting hepatitis A free on your specification probably isn't likely, but knowing the source of that ingredient and what they're experiencing in that region of the world might be something to consider. Do you think, Jennifer? I mean, that's kind of where my thought process was, is I understood it came in from your raw material, but what could we have done to prevent that? Could that have been part of that approved supplier program?
I think this is a whole nother topic, LeAnn. We talk about horizon scanning and really understanding what our suppliers are doing, because we're not in Timbuktu where some of our ingredients are coming from. So with horizon scanning, you're looking out to see what's happening in all those regions and you're being notified. So like I said, that's a whole nother webinar.
Okay, I'll pencil
Talking about horizon scanning.
We'll
So.
pencil it in. But you're right, it is a completely, but I feel that it's tied into approved supplier programs. Yeah.
You're right, very much so. So understanding what's happening, we just heard on the news over the weekend about those radioactive shrimp, right?
Right, right.
So
Exactly.
we shall move on. So this is an example of a risk-based supplier assessment matrix. So it shows how to use a risk-based approach to evaluate suppliers. So high-risk suppliers usually need the most thorough activities like third-party audits, on-site evaluations, and frequent product testing, whereas our medium-risk suppliers can be managed with a combination of audits, certificate reviews, or some targeted testing. And for low-risk suppliers, simpler tools such as questionnaires or periodic certificate reviews are often enough. The goal here is to match the type and intensity of assessment to the risk level of the materials, making sure that you're using your resources and their focus where they can most improve food safety and compliance.
Hey, Jennifer, while you have this slide up, I do have just a quick point of clarification here, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So when you're saying each of this has a combination approach in a sense. So third-party audits might not always apply to the medium risk supplier, but like for a high risk supplier, you're also looking at certificate reviews, not just there isn't just one solution, right? For assessments for high, medium, low risk. There could be a combination of assessments, even like going back to Justine's question, which was really, okay, we didn't get in it looked different. We never received any notification. So whether we might not, they might still be a medium risk, but we might up our assessment type. We might do more different things to evaluate it. Is that kind of what I'm reading in this?
You are.
Oh,
And, again, you may, for a high-risk supplier, you may say, I want you to be GFSI certificated. I want to see your audit report. I want to see your certificate. And oh, by the way, we're still going to do microbial testing because that's really important to us with this material coming in. So you're sending materials out to have them checked for, APC, yeast mold and such, because that's critical to your process.
right.
So
And
it truly is a combination of things that are important to your organization and your finished product.
And I don't know if you talk about this, but what are some of the indicators that would drive a high risk, medium risk, low risk supplier? Like there was a question, Matt just posted a question in the chat. Sorry, I don't mean to keep peppering you. This was not rehearsed. Normally Jennifer's like, okay, challenge accepted. So Matt just posted in the chat, if a supplier is international, does the risk go up? So do enough to perform a site visit. So what if they don't have a GFSI recognized certificate? Is that a higher risk? Do we go on site? What would be some of the indicators that would be a high risk, a medium risk, or a low risk supplier?
When I think about this, LeAnn, if it's a high-risk supplier, it's how that supplier is impacting your finished product and the risk associated with that. So if you're manufacturing a product that's going, we'll just say something like raw milk. You know that when you send raw milk to the dairy processor, it's going to be contaminated with bacteria because the processor is going to do pasteurization. So if you know that a step made by your customer is going to take care of a risk, something that may be high risk isn't such a high risk. Am I talking in circles here? I mean,
No,
it just depends on how it all works out about whether it's a high risk, medium risk, or low risk. If it's going to impact your finished product in a way, and keep in mind, your finished product can always be an intermediate for your customer. But just because it's your finished product doesn't always mean it's a finished product to somebody else.
true. So
So
at
it's
the
depends on
pasteurization,
how it interacts. And on the question about an international supplier, if through the records you are the importer of record, you are now in foreign supplier verification program and you have to meet the regulatory requirements. If you're buying it through a distributor who is the importer of record, then a little bit of the pressure is off of you. But as a supplier approval of that distributor, you need to make sure that they're meeting FSVP requirements as well from
yeah.
that perspective. So it can sound a little bit confusing, but
Yeah, no, that because Matt actually had another question regarding if the site can they decide that if a supplier has a recognized GFSI certificate,
mhm.
that reassessment once initially and then reapproved as long as that supplier stays certified. So can that be a method of that assessment? Say, I have a supplier, I decide my method of assessment is they need to have, let's say, SQF certification for the purpose of this webinar, and it's not a requirement in the code. I just really want to, because we cannot mandate SQF along the supply chain. So but let's just say that supplier says, I'm SQF, I want my supply chain to be SQF, so they have to have an SQF certificate, and that's what our requirement is. Would that be acceptable, or is that, so you're saying, would there be other things, or is that an acceptable method depending on the level of risk?
It is an acceptable method because an independent audit has occurred.
Mhm.
So it can be a third-party audit, or you can do an on-site audit yourself if you're a qualified individual that can do audits. So it's those words that get in there. So third-party audits are acceptable, but I'll share with you of a client that I was working with last year that is under FSVP requirements, and the FDA said to them, I see you have the hazard analysis and the certificate, but how do you know that the hazard analysis, the mitigation they're taking is effective. And they were actually pushing the client to understand what are vegetative pathogens. Is it Listeria? Is it Salmonella? Is it E. coli? And to clearly define these pathogens and understand how they're being mitigated. So the FDA, when it comes to foreign supplier verification program, they've really gone beyond educate, and they're truly beginning to regulate, and they're writing 483As against these importers that are not doing the right thing. And I mean, a handful of clients have come to us to say, please help us because we need help with this. And I just want to really share that message that it's okay to have the third-party audit, to have the hazard analysis, to have the control plan, but you need to make sure that that clearly demonstrates the hazards are being managed.
Yeah, I think that's where many of the findings are. And I have a couple questions for you at the end. And
Okay.
a couple more that came up, but I'll pepper them in or I'll save them for the end. So I see everybody's questions. Please keep chatting them in, and I'll either ask Jennifer now or we'll save them for the end. But yeah, keep asking your questions. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, Jennifer. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. We're just going to keep moving along. Okay. So on our next slide, I really want to talk about some ongoing supplier evaluation. Truly depends on effective tools and metrics. So oftentimes we'll see performance scorecards that track key indicators like on-time delivery, non-conformances, and the success of corrective actions as a way of measuring your supplier to see if they're meeting your spec, your expectations, and your needs. We see testing programs that provide extra assurance, especially for those high-risk suppliers for ingredients by confirming compliance with the specification. Certificate management keeps suppliers' certificates current and valid, while trend analysis helps us recognize patterns or emerging risk. And I have to say that as an auditor, when I looked at approved supplier programs, I could always find a handful of certificates that were expired. When I randomly picked materials to look at, keeping current on the supplier certificates is a challenge. And so that's something that you really need to think about, is how you're going to manage those certificates if you're using that as a means of approval of a supplier, to make sure you don't have an expired certificate, specifically with SQF, where it expires annually and it has to be reissued every year.
Yeah. That's actually my question is with FDA and the findings from FDA. I know FSVP is the number one finding, hands down. Like when we do our top 10 nonconformances, Tammy, our compliance manager, she doesn't do top 10. She does like the top nonconformances and where there's a natural break in the data. But if we were to do a natural break in the data with FDA findings, it would literally only be FSVP. So what is that number one finding all about? Is it the lack of a program, the lack of documentation, the lack of defined hazards? What is that number one finding all about?
The number one finding is a lack of a program, because so many importers don't know what they need to be doing, or they bury their head in the sand hoping that they'll get overlooked. I shouldn't say that, but that's how it feels. And then if there is a program, it's kind of a slap together program. So the documentation isn't there. You need to demonstrate as an importer that you have gone through and you have done the due diligence, and you've reviewed the hazard analysis, you've reviewed the certificates, you've reviewed everything to guarantee that the product that you're bringing in is safe in the US. And, you know, in a nutshell, the whole reason FSVP is there is because without it, if I imported tomatoes from Italy and it made people sick, I have no recourse because they're from Italy. We can't go back to Italy as the government and do something. So now with FSVP, we can hold the importer accountable for any issues that may arise from product that's brought in that causes harm to consumers in the US.
Makes sense. Just to hop on the FSVP, Steve asked a question. If they are not the importer of record, to what extent are they required to maintain an FSVP program? So maybe you could go back to the basics really as to who's required to maintain that FSVP program, or if they're not the importer of record, what is their level of responsibility and involvement in the FSVP program?
So if you are not the importer of record, your involvement is approving the supplier that you're purchasing it from. So understanding that they are the importer of record, you want to make sure that they have a program, FSVP program, that's effective and works. So it's part of your supplier approval process. You have different approval metrics for raw materials, for packaging, for different components. So you think about your suppliers of these types of materials, the distributor, and you set those expectations.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. But when we think about these different metrics, collectively, these tools build that proactive system that promotes continuous improvement throughout the supply chain. So we have a couple examples, real world here, of how having an FSVP and SQF program integrated together has really been effective. So by establishing a risk-based pesticide testing schedule requiring GFSI certification for their high-risk suppliers and creating a unified documentation system, a company achieved a 40% reduction in nonconformances during its SQF audit over a 12-month period by demonstrating how aligning program leads to measurable improvements in supplier verification and food safety performance. So by really aligning these two programs and working them together, they were able to improve their FSVP portion and their SQF portion with requirements. Because even though there are differences, I would say similarities are stronger than the differences. Would you agree, LeAnn?
Yeah, I love this slide because it just kind of brings, as I was going through this presentation, I was like, how at the end, look at when we combine and not just treat everything as a silo and meeting regulations, meeting SQF. And that's the intent of having your food safety system in place, is to meet regulations and meet all of the requirements from all of the different buyers and specifiers that you have, your clients and customers, as well as meeting just those food safety system requirements. So I think combining that together, it just streamlines and builds a comprehensive food safety system, and we're not treating it as a siloed program. And here's what we do for this, and here's what we do for that. Because there are requirements within SQF that I think go a little bit above and beyond the FSVP, and there's requirements within FSVP that go a little bit beyond SQF. So combining them together just makes a very strong program as it relates to approved suppliers, documentation, risk analysis, risk assessment. Is that your take? Is that kind of what you were thinking? Why are these results so good?
I agree. Integrated management systems make life so much easier for companies when they're working with one management system. And I think it's also important to point out that within SQF and the other GFSI standards, there's this little caveat of words that say, and all other regulatory requirements. So you have to meet the SQF requirements and all other regulatory. So that means 21 CFR 117, the Food Safety Modernization Act. It means FSVP, it means sanitary transportation. It means all these regulatory pieces that come out of FSMA that you're also required to meet. So it's there's, like I said, there's few little words that really open up the can of worms, so to speak, but it's how we make sure that we have safe food out there.
Yeah,
Safe
exactly.
products. Mm-hmm. So the second example I have here is an ingredient manufacturer that really improved their supplier verification. They created the tiered supplier approval system that's based on risk, like we saw earlier in the slide. They decided to hold quarterly review meetings with quality and procurement teams and implement a digital tracking system for certificates and performance metrics. So that's how they made sure they didn't have expired certificates. The result, they had a more efficient audit preparation and a 30% decrease in review time at the importer location, demonstrating how the structured supplier management can boost efficiency and compliance. And when you first begin to look at it, you feel like you're being buried in a mountain of paperwork. But once you wrap your hands around it and get your program in place, it's so much easier to manage.
Yeah. Do you think it was the digital, like of those three, what they put into place, what do you think was the most impactful? Was
I
it
agree. It's the digital tracking, making sure that they had notifications. Hey, ask for the new certificate. Make sure you get the new stuff so that you're not chasing it when the FDA comes knocking on your door, hoping that you can get it.
Yeah, the streamlined, yeah, absolutely.
True. So, um, there's some pitfalls. So when you're designing and implementing a supplier verification program, it's really important to avoid these pitfalls. One example is using a one-size-fits-all approach. Having insufficient hazard analysis documentation or overlooking suppliers like packaging or processing aids that can create gaps. I am in my career here in food safety, I used to say SQF back, I think it was a version 8, they introduced that food contact surfaces should be seen as a raw material. And this is the writing on the wall, people. It's all going to change. I'm not sure if that's the right version, LeAnn, but I remember when you guys introduced that a contact surface should be seen as a raw material and impacts the finished good. So we need to make sure that those things are being reviewed as well and not, like I said, that one size fits all. Additionally, siloed department processes can really get you in a lot of trouble. Inadequate follow-up on corrective actions, expired certificates, that's my little hot spot there. And neglecting to periodically reassess the program's effectiveness can undermine the results. Being aware of some of these pitfalls, it's really going to help your company develop more robust risk-based supplier programs.
Yeah, and I would say corrective actions on that is my trigger because we've had recalls where they have found issues with incoming product, and whether it be from a complaint from a customer, or whether it's something that they've identified in their testing, that they saw issues with the incoming goods and they didn't implement any type of follow-up or corrective action and went to complaints and it was handled that way versus following up. And we had a recall associated with something that was identified 6 months earlier in a customer complaint. And then that happened, and then a recall happened 6 months later. And so I keep wondering if the site had followed up, with that corrective action and put into place, measures and your CAPA process, would the recall have occurred, so it's following up on those corrective actions or establishing good root cause and corrective actions in place. That's kind of the things that I'm seeing there. Mhm.
Right. And to the point you're speaking about there, it's the verification of effectiveness, isn't it? Was the
Mhm.
corrective
Yes.
action you take ineffective, or did you open Pandora's box and create more problems? And
Ex-
I think that in auditing, that is a place where customers sometimes struggle, is that verification of effectiveness, because they feel like they can't get unburied from all the CAPAs that are out there. So
Right.
it's really taking that follow-up piece there that's so important.
Yeah, no, it's good to know what those challenges are so that you can create programs to avoid, just like this title says, and that's the intent here. So I always like to share what we see happen so that we know we can anticipate and perhaps create programs or policies, procedures, methods, training, whatever it takes to avoid these types of pitfalls.
Right. So as we wrap up here, some key takeaways for leveraging your supplier program: integrate your SQF and FSVP requirements into that unified management system. It's really going to make your life so much easier. Use your supplier data for continuous improvement. Apply a risk-based approach to focus on the highest risk suppliers and maintain comprehensive documentation to demonstrate due diligence. It's important to remember an effective approved supplier program is more than compliance. It's strategic asset that protects your brand, reduces risk, and drives real business value. And it's only going to help you in the end.
Yes, great
So we
information.
really thank you there.
Yes, great information. And I honestly, my key takeaway from this, and maybe people could put it into the chat what their key takeaway was in this presentation. But my key takeaway was really stop siloing programs, stop doing regulatory here. I mean, I know everybody has their different approach, but creating this comprehensive food safety system, because it's not that regular SQF replaces regulatory or regulatory replaces SQF. It's mutually complementary, right? So your suppliers or your customers might have specifications that you need to meet. We have specifications, regulatory has theirs, and together they form this comprehensive food safety system at your site. So excellent. There were still some questions. I tried to ease you into it, so it wasn't just a question show at the end, but I do have some questions and I captured them here. So Julia asks, if your product is antimicrobial, anti-pathogenic, and no allergens, would the GFSI recognized certificate and audit report work without having to do any verification testing for the microbial content? So, so no pathogens, no allergens. You know, what would be their verification? Is there any verification testing or anything in the developed? I'm assuming Julie is talking about the specifications.
Right. I think that as an auditor, I would look at what is the finished product. And, a common what comes to mind when we think about this is vinegar. What's going to grow in vinegar, right?
Yeah,
And
right.
so
Yeah.
we look at the raw material or the material and we understand the nature of it. And by the nature of what it is, then we can make an assumption. If it's not that easy to make that assumption, then it never hurts to do an annual verification test, to send a sample out and just have it tested and say, see, we told you, here's our
Yeah.
results. And we're verifying that our material is what we say it is. It's almost kind of like chain of custody with claims, right? So
Yeah.
just saying that. So that's my thought on it.
No, that's actually a really good example because I was like, what is antimicrobial, antibiotic? I couldn't even think of an ingredient, but yeah, that's a really good example. So thanks. Okay, so Cam asked, yeah, he says he's new to the food industry, and is there an ISO FSQ standard, or what requirement do we follow? We need to certify as a container manufacturer.
Okay, so under the GFSI standards, there are packaging standards that you can use. If I think about a container as maybe a bottle or a drum or such that food products are going into. So I would highly suggest that you look at the packaging standard. SQF has one. I don't remember which module it is, LeAnn, I'm sorry. Too many
13.
standards.
13.
13. So you can look at the SQF module 13, and that defines the requirements for packaging. So you can get an SQF certificate for packaging.
Okay, yeah, great. T. McDaniel asks, we are currently trying to start doing this. What documents or requirements are needed for each supplier for them to be considered approved? Do you have an example of what a good supplier register would look like? Do you have any examples for that?
I think about those when I've done audits and looked at it, and what I see that works best is when companies have gone through and they said these are my suppliers, and then based on the risk, and it really comes back to your hazard analysis, because keep in mind when you do your hazard analysis, you're not just looking at the process, you're looking at all the inputs, and the inputs are the raw materials, they're the equipment, they're the processing aids, they're the lubricants, it's everything that goes into that process. And you're rating it by saying, how much do I need to be concerned about this as I go through the process of making it? And I hope I'm not being too confusing here. But what you do is you analyze, you identify what's high risk for you that you need to mitigate in some way, and you can mitigate it at the supplier or mitigate it in your process, and then understand that. So it sounds like a lot of work in the beginning, and it can be depending on the products that you're making. But once it's done, it really helps you figure out what you need to do.
Yeah.
I think that was a little confusing, LeAnn. Can you make it better?
Actually, there's a follow-up question because even when you're developing that matrix, or it's more about what about the testing programs and verification, like verifying the incoming ingredients against your specification. Is there specific routine testing? What's necessary? Can you just use a COA? Can you use the lot of guarantee? Like, when would you use each of that, for example? So like, if my incoming ingredients, it's, zero salmonella, less than 10 E. coliforms, blah, blah, blah. Am I having to retest that just, or is there a sample? Like, how would you set that up just to?
Well, according to, the supplier program in FSMA, it gives you different ways that you can improve your suppliers, and testing is one of them. But it goes on to say that you can rely on C of A data as part of testing because they're doing the testing. And
Mhm.
one of the things that I always like to point out is, verification and validation. So validation is, can it do what it's supposed to do? And verification is it doing it? But
Mhm.
if we gather verification data all year long and we're validating our hazard plan, aren't we using our verification data to validate?
Oh, yeah, I guess.
So, so think about it from that perspective, that if you're looking at the C of A and it's good, it's good, it's good, and then you make your finished product and there's no contamination, then you can feel that you're getting good raw materials in because you're not getting contaminated finished products. And you're using all this verification data to say, my supplier's good, my process is good, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I guess, yeah, in a very circuitous way, right? It all complements each other, definitely. So is there an FDA database for all approved, verified, imported raw materials into the US? Like a lookup status? Is there a database for that? Does FDA have that?
There is a database, and I can get it to you, LeAnn, and we can get it out to the people on the call.
Okay, that would
But
be
I let me see. I had it open earlier today. Let me see if I can pop it up and show it to you guys. That would be exciting, wouldn't it?
that would be let me see who I'm gonna see who asked that question, and I will tell you who'll be really excited. Gosh.
Look at this. Can you see it? The
Oh,
FDA data
yeah, there
dashboard.
it is.
And you can go in here and you can actually search a firm. And if you know their FEI number, or if you put in their name here, it will actually search for you. So it's thinking now. Of course, it's the FDA database, so it has to think, right?
Wow, that's amazing.
But
Thank you.
yeah, this is something when I'm doing work with clients on FSVP and I'm looking at some of their suppliers, I go right in here and it'll tell me if there's been any anything that's been held, why it's been held, if there are any 483s. It just gives you all kinds of information that
Wow.
will help you.
Amazing. That was by Virginia asked that. So Virginia, hopefully that answers your question.
There
That's
you go. It's the FDA database. And
excellent.
I was actually going in, and you can look at compliance action, recalls, import summaries. There's all kinds of refusals and all kinds of really good information on this database, and it's managed by the FDA.
Can you copy that URL and just drop it in the chat? That would be amazing.
Sure.
That way we can have it and yeah.
So, yeah, and
Excellent.
there, chat.
Okay, well, let's see. We got 12 more minutes and the questions keep popping in. So this is amazing. Excellent. Okay, next question is what is the appropriate frequency of sampling testing as used in a supplier verification activities and FSVP? So is there a requirement for sampling and testing? And two, what would you think would be appropriate and meet those requirements?
I'm going to tell you what everyone hates to hear. It's risk-based. And you need to understand what the risks are and how much risk you're willing to accept. That's what we tell clients all the time when they ask, how many times do I have to do this? It's like, well, you can do it once a year if you're willing to recall a whole year's worth of product, right? So how much
Yeah,
risk are you willing to take? It's very much risk-based. And
excellent.
from an FSVP perspective, the FDA wants to see that you are protecting consumers. So you may need to do things a little bit more frequently. You may have to ask your foreign supplier to send you testing results with every shipment. So you can say, we're getting reviews, and then every so often we'll send one out to verify the C of A to make sure that it's correct. So,
Yeah.
but
The
I
other
think the safest way is to get the supplier to send it to you in the foreign supplier program.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. The other thing everybody hates to hear is it depends. So
Is it vinegar?
yeah, right. It depends, yes. Question, and I'm gonna read it, but I still haven't figured it out yet, so maybe you'll know what they're talking about. Of the US importers for that matter, as a manufacturer and purchasing to distributors, we also wanted to make sure they are approved by FDA. This is referring back to that dashboard. So
Mhm.
is that, I think the idea is that they want to make sure that they are approved by FDA. Is that on that dashboard or?
So within that dashboard, you'll be able to find the reports from the FDA review of them. So most foreign suppliers have the FDA come over and do an audit, so to speak, and they get documents. You'll find that in the dashboard.
Okay. Is FSVP applicable to food packaging made overseas or only food ingredients? And if yes, what type of food packaging? Like that's, I added that part.
So my experience to date has only been food products that we consume, not really stretched into packaging.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That's an easy
Mhm.
answer. Is there an FSVP certificate? Like is a facility issued a certificate, or are they just posted and receive a letter of conformance, or how do they acknowledge that FSVP?
Right. There, this is a common question. No certification body can issue a certificate against a regulation. It's just, we can't do it. So we can audit against the requirements and we can give you a report that says you meet the expectations, blah, blah, blah. We cannot issue certificates. So
Okay.
that's that part of it. There is a program, we all love our acronyms, right? It's called VQuip. It's voluntary quality. I can't even remember the acronym, but it's almost like the TSA of coming into the product. So you apply for VQuip, you pay money for VQuip, and you get the fast track in when you're importing products in. So they come in, they get to be in the fast lane because they're part of the VQuip program. And I think that's the closest to probably what they're asking about.
Okay, thanks. Question, I work in the flavor industry, and because there are thousands of raw materials, flavor chemicals, we break it out by product type. And they go into the different types of products: oleoresins, encapsulates, aromatic flavor, single chemical substances. Do we need to conduct a risk analysis for every individual ingredient that is supplied to her, or is it okay to use the grouping method?
If you can demonstrate that what you're doing is effective, then you can group. We always talk about lumping or dumping. And, I worked in the flavor industry in my past, and I understand what you mean by thousands of ingredients that are living through chemistry. So um, we would group together the types of products also and manage it that way. And it is acceptable as long as you can demonstrate that they truly are like as.
Yeah, okay. And Samantha wants to, is there, so as like a new company, as a new site starting out, where would you start with your approved supplier program? Like where, I mean, there is a lot. It is somewhat very overwhelming. I mean, when you look at it, and we know how important it is. So what would you be your recommendation? Like, where would you start? Is there, let's say, whether it's, is there templates? Is there training? Is there like, how would you introduce yourself to and start on supplier approval programs?
Right. There are training programs that are available. They're offered by, SGS offers them. You can find them on the SGS Academy. I'm sure that SQF has programs also that are out there that people can train to, but I think it's really important if you're just starting to do that evaluation of what is my low risk. And I would start with low risk because that's easy. You can say that, the cartons that we pack the jugs in that has the juice in it are very low risk because they're not food contact. I mean, that's kind of being extreme, but really looking at all the materials and identifying those which are low risk and just pulling them out, just saying, we're going to worry about these, the least amount, we're going to require the least amount. And then looking at what's left and determine based on the material, what you would consider medium or high risk and begin to think about that. But that's how I would start because the whole program really is based on the level of risk and what you're going to require. And then depending on the product that you're making and the materials you're receiving, you want to think about how am I going to verify this and make sure our supplier is giving me the right thing every time and I don't have to worry about it. And so that's where I would start, is just really understanding where the risk is.
Yeah, no, that's a really good idea. It just start out with something, and then I think it'll just help you start just almost like momentum wise build. Yeah.
Mhm.
A question that I think I can answer, is there certain approved supplier requirements for distributors and brokers when reviewing for approval and risk assessing? Are distributors and brokers required to have a GFSI recognized certificate? I know we always say GFSI certified, and just on a side note, there is no such thing as GFSI certified. So GFSI recognizes the certificate. So that's why I kind of always edit it's GFSI recognized certificate. So I can speak from SQF, and then if there is something related to FSVP, feel free to jump in, Jennifer. But for SQF, we do have a distribution code. So we do have requirements for storage and distributions. We do not have a code for brokers. And and then there's a follow-up question regarding, is it required, to have, whether your brokers or storage and distribution sites are recognized, have like SQF certified. And while we do have that, it really depends. There's no requirement at all. It really depends who you're working with and down the supply chain, what their requirements are for you as it relates to verifying your food safety system. So it really, I know the word depends, the word verification, the word validation always is a headache for everybody, but it kind of all depends as it relates to what those requirements are. Now, is there anything in foreign supplier verification regarding brokers or distributors?
It doesn't call it out specifically that way, LeAnn. It says, if you are the importer of record, you must, or you
Yeah,
shall, and that's it. It doesn't say, are you an agent? Are you a broker? Are you a distributor? If you are the importer of record, then you must do this.
yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
Yeah, and there is a code. It's fairly comprehensive, but storage and distribution, I will say, probably is one of our uh uh the it's out there, and it's very comprehensive. It has a lot of good information in it. Okay, just a couple more questions, and then I think we'll finish right on time. If an ingredient used in my facility has an FDA alert and I'm not aware of it or haven't had visibility, could that be considered a finding during an audit? Can I ensure I stay informed and prevent, or how can I ensure I stay informed and prevent this from happening? Stay tuned to our Horizon Scan webinar.
Right.
Cole, mark that down. We're going to have a follow-up Horizon Scan webinar. But go ahead, answer that question, Jennifer.
I would say that yes, it is a finding because you need to be aware. And whether you're monitoring that FDA database that is in the chat or how you're managing it, it's almost like, but I didn't know the speed limit was 45. I thought it was 65, but you're still speeding, right? You're going to get a ticket. And
Yeah.
that's how we have to look at it.
Yeah. And then the last question is building on that. And we're not here to endorse any type of software programs. And I know in the chat, everybody has been chatting in their ideas of software programs, but is there any systems, digital systems or software that tracks this type of information, certificates, supplier qualifications, those kinds of things? Does SGS have anything, or do you know of anything that would be helpful, or where people could go?
Right. SGS has launched a program called TrackKey, but it's specific to FSMA 204, but it could be used with many different types of products and tracking that. But again, what it really comes down to is what works for you. And some people, it might be an Excel spreadsheet with email reminders, and other people want an elaborate database type system. If it works for you and you can stay on top of it, then that's what works. So I wish I could say, oh yeah, you have to do this, but it really is what works for you.
Yes. Well, Jennifer, we are right out of time. This was an amazing conversation and such knowledge on everything. So thank you very much for spending your time with us today, this past hour, and putting together all of this amazing information. So the recording of the webinar will be available pretty soon. Cole's really good at getting it all out. SQF is really good at posting it. So thank you again very much. Here's all the contact information. So if you have a specific question for Jennifer, please email her, or info@sqfi.com. Feel free to either give us a call or an email. So Jennifer, thanks again. Thank you so much. And many thanks to SGS for sponsoring this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, LeAnn.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.